Hi everybody, so we are now getting ready to start our session on William Shakespeare. We're going to be reading and discussing the tragedy of Macbeth. So, William Shakespeare, born 1564, died 1616, and he is considered to be the most gifted and prolific playwright of the English language. He wrote and had staged nearly 50 plays, many of them for the royal court in England. He also had his own theater company, the Globe Theater, which was commissioned by the Crown while he was working in London. He also produced poetry, sonnets, and poems of greater length. And he was considered a genius. It's important for us to be aware when we're reading Shakespeare that we're reading Elizabethan language. The language of Shakespeare's time was still English, but English that is going to feel quite a bit different from the English that we speak today. However, you're going to recognize in Shakespeare's Macbeth some expressions that we use today. Like, for example, the be-all, end-all. So when we say, this is the be-all, end-all, meaning this is the most that I can tolerate, or this is the final manifestation of a thing, that comes from Shakespeare. And it's one of dozens and dozens of expressions that he coined that stayed in the English language as part of our idiomatic expression. So what I want to do in discussing Macbeth, first of all, is to understand what it is that we're reading. Now, we talked about the structure of a tragedy, right? So the tragedy of Macbeth when we are reading or watching a tragedy, we follow the line of the protagonist who begins the story in a place of honor, in a place of respect among his peers or her peers. But then by the end of the story, there's been a fall, right? So what we're going to be following in Macbeth is the fall of Macbeth. And as we follow Macbeth, what we want to try to understand is the ongoing theme of this, which is to what extent did Macbeth engineer his own downfall? And to what extent was Macbeth manipulated, right? Because in the beginning of the play, the very first thing that we see is three witches on the stage. So the stage opens up, Act 1, Scene 1, and most directors use a lot of smoky special effects at this point. Maybe the entire stage is dark and the witches just appear in a single spotlight in the center of the stage. There's a lot of dry ice making, the vapor that comes around their cauldron while they are chanting dire spells. All right. So this sets the stage for what's to come. We know that there's going to be some black magic. We know there's going to be some evil. We know that there's going to be some supernatural forces that are interfering and trying to pull the strings here. So the question we need to ask ourselves is Macbeth being manipulated by these witches all the way through the play? Or did Macbeth actually plant the seeds of his own destruction? So that's the question we want to ask ourselves all throughout as we are exploring this play. So if we turn to our study questions, right, we can see that the first one asks us, who is it who tells Macbeth he will be king? And in a way, I've already answered that by talking about the three witches. But it's more than just that. There's a whole way in which it unfolds. So if we look at those three witches chanting together, they appear out of nowhere on the heath, really in the middle of a field, as Macbeth and his best friend, Banquo, are returning from a battle. And in this battle, the Scotland, because Macbeth is a thane of Scotland, meaning that he's something of a knight. So thane is sort of the the Scottish equivalent of a knight for that time period. And when I say that time period, I mean around 1040, right? Because this is based on an actual real historical episode in Scottish history from the medieval times. There really was a King Macbeth, very briefly, and he really did seize power through nefarious means. But whether or not the rest of all this happened, again, like many of the other stories that we've been exploring in this class, based on fact, but fictionalized. Okay, so this is how we want to understand what Shakespeare did with Macbeth. Like so many of his other plays, it was based on history, but he also creates some things that embellish and make it more theatrical, right? So Macbeth, returning from battle with his friend Banquo, are met by these three witches who just appear out of nowhere and say, "Hail, hail, Macbeth, Macbeth who shall be Thane of Cawdor." Now, this doesn't make any sense to Macbeth because he's the Thane of Glamis, not the Thane of Cawdor, right? So, the different districts of Scotland had different knights, thanes, that were attached to them. This is not Macbeth's title. They're calling him from a different title, which Macbeth says, "Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" These are not my robes. This is not my title. Macbeth and Banquo have two very different reactions to these witches. See, not only do they address him as Thane of Cawdor, they say, "He who shall be king hereafter, Macbeth who shall be king hereafter." Now this really doesn't make sense, all right? So, not only is Macbeth already the Thane of Glamis and not the Thane of Cawdor, he also isn't even in the royal family. He's not in line to take the throne from King Duncan. He's not King Duncan's son or nephew or anything. It doesn't make any sense. So Banquo and he look at each other, and Banquo says, "Were such things here as we do speak about, or have we eaten on the insane root that takes the reason prisoner?" Have we eaten on the insane root that takes the reason prisoner? In other words, did we just see a hallucination? Was it something we ate? Macbeth turns to him and says, "Into air, and what seemed corporeal melted as breath into the wind. Would they had stayed." Meaning, I only wish they had stayed. Too bad they disappeared. They had such good news for us. See, what their prophecy is, when they look at Banquo, they tell him, you will be lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy, yet much happier. Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none, so all hail Macbeth and Banquo. So in other words, Macbeth will be king, but Banquo's children will be kings. None of this makes sense. Neither of them are in the line to take the throne. And if Macbeth is the king, why would Banquo's children be the king after that? It doesn't make any sense. So they look at each other. Macbeth says, "Your children shall be kings." Banquo says, "You shall be king." Macbeth says, "And Thane of Cawdor too. Went it not so?" Banquo says, "The self-same tune in words." Right? Then we get an immediate entry upon the stage of two more soldiers who come to greet Macbeth with a new title. They say to him that he is now going to be promoted. He says, "The Thane of Cawdor, in which edition hail most worthy Thane, for it is thine," meaning it is your title. And Banquo says, "Can the devil speak true?" Interesting that he's referring now to the witch's prophecy as having come from the devil. It tells you a little bit of something about Banquo's feelings about the witches. Macbeth says, "But the Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" And Angus says to him, "Well, the Thane of Cawdor actually proved himself to be untrustworthy in battle. He was in league with the enemy. He betrayed his comrades in arms, and he needs to be replaced. So, congratulations, you're the new Thane of Cawdor." So, literally within 15 minutes of receiving the prophecy, it comes true. So, this has a remarkable effect on our main character, Macbeth. Macbeth, after getting the news, says, "If chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir." Right? So if the first part of the prophecy came true, maybe the second part, maybe chance will crown me. But maybe the second part of the prophecy will come true. So then Banquo says something to him, though, which is, first of all, that line about the insane root. Have we eaten on the insane root that takes the reason prisoner? In other words, none of this is reasonable. In order to believe, to leave reason aside, or have our reason imprisoned. In order to believe this, you can't be using your rational mind. And then, on page 45, he says another interesting thing. It's around, well, my page 45, but we're still in Act 1, Scene 3. Banquo says, around line 120, "'Tis strange oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths, to win us with honest trifles, to betray us in deepest consequence." Okay, so the instruments of darkness, oftentimes to win us to our harm, tell us truths, and win us with honest trifles, only to betray us later. So now he's called the witches the devil. He's called the witches the instruments of darkness. He has said that believing the prophecy is tantamount to taking the reason prisoner. So all of this tells us something about Banquo's attitude, right? About the prophecy. Whereas Macbeth could hardly be more excited. In fact, if we look down to study question number 3, this is where we get to Lady Macbeth. Now, Lady Macbeth appears in Scene 5, her entrance into the play is Act 1, Scene 5, where she's reading a letter that Macbeth, her husband, has written to her. Now, in this letter, he says, "They met me in the day of success, and I have learned by the perfectest report that they have more in them than mortal knowledge. When I burned in desire to question them further, they made themselves air, into which they vanished. Whilst I stood wrapped in the wonder of it, came missives from the king, and all hailed me Thane of Cawdor, by which title before these weird sisters had saluted me, and referred me to the coming of time, hail king that shall be. This I have thought good to deliver to thee, my dearest partner in greatness." My dearest partner in greatness. This is how he refers to her. So when he gets the news from the witches, the first thing that he does is writes to his wife to tell her how excited he is to get this news, and that the first part of the prophecy has already come true. So these are promising developments, no? My dear partner in greatness. She puts this letter aside and says to him, to the heir, now she's by herself. So here's something that we want to acknowledge, that when we're reading any Shakespeare play, whether it's a tragedy or a comedy or, you know, his plays in general have certain tropes, certain encoded happenings and rhythms that we want to be able to recognize. And one of those is that when a character is standing on the stage all by themselves and speaking to the air, they are speaking the truth coming right out of their soul. They are not performing for other characters. They're not dealing with the persona by which they want others to perceive them. They're being purely honest. They're being completely from the heart, completely from the gut. This is who they actually really are when they're on the stage by themselves. That's when they're telling the truth about themselves. So this is how we meet Lady Macbeth. She puts aside this letter. There's no one else on the stage. And she says, Glamis thou art, and Cawdor, and shall be what thou art promised. Yet I do fear thy nature. It is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition, but without the illness that should attend it. What thou wouldst highly, thou wouldst holily, would not play false, and yet wouldst wrongly win. Too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Now that's another expression from Shakespeare that people still use, the milk of human kindness. He's too full of kindness to do what needs to be done in order for that second part of the prophecy, the important part, that he will be king. Right? So he says, she says that what thou wouldst do, you're not without ambition, but without the illness that should attend it. Not without ambition, but without the illness should attend it. Right? You're ambitious, but you don't want to do the nasty work to get what needs to be done. Right? So she is interrupted by a messenger who comes and tells her the great news: the king is going to be staying in the castle that night. What a surprise! The king is going to honor the Macbeth family with his presence and all of his royal entourage to congratulate Macbeth on his promotion from Thane of Glamis to Thane of Cawdor. Lady Macbeth immediately sees this as her opportunity. And when the messenger leaves, she is once again on the stage by herself and says, the raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. Now the raven, of course, is like a crow, a black bird. The crow is often associated with death. The crow is seen as a symbol of coming death. So when she says the raven is like a larger crow in England. The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. And then she does something highly weird. She casts a spell. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, and fill me from crown to toe, top full of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose, nor keep peace between the effect and it. Come to my woman's breasts, and take my milk for gall. You murdering ministers, wherever in your sightless substances you wait on nature's mischiefs, come thick night, and pall thee in the dunnest smoke of hell. That my keen knife see not the wound it makes, nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark to cry, hold, hold. She's asking the spirits to take away everything in her that is kind, everything in her that is good, everything in her that is nurturing, and replace it with murderous cruelty. And not only that, but in those final lines of that soliloquy, pall thee in the dunnest smoke of hell, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes. So let me kill without being able to see my works. My keen knife see not the wound it makes, nor heaven peek through the blanket of the dark to cry, hold, hold. Let me not only do the act of murder, but also have it concealed. Concealed from heaven, concealed from morality, concealed from my own better nature, so that my keen knife see not the wound it makes. So, commit murder and do it in deception at the same time. This is what she's praying on the dark spirits to give her the strength to do. So, then her husband arrives on the stage. And she gives him the news. King Duncan comes here tonight. And Macbeth, seeing and getting the whiff of what it is that she's got on her mind, begins to look perhaps a little bit like he might be getting cold feet. She says, "Your face, my Thane, is a book where men may read strange matters. To beguile the time, look like the time. Bear welcome in your eye, your hand, your tongue. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it." All right, here she is advising him, when the king arrives, be all smiles, be pleasant, be nice, but be the serpent. All right, so she also says, leave all the rest to me. The final line here, only look up clear, to alter favor ever is to fear. Leave all the rest to me. Put this matter in my dispatch, she says. I'll take care of this. So, what is it that they're going to plan to do? What is it that's on their minds? Of course, the only way that Macbeth can get on that throne is if the king is done away with, right? Now, the king himself has sons who would be in line for the throne, so that's another problem that needs to be dealt with. But first, he needs to be gotten out of the way. So, when we look at, if we go to a little bit further down into the next scene, scene 6, or scene 7 it is actually, we see the interaction between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. Once it becomes clear between the two of them that if that prophecy is going to come true, that they're going to have to kill the king. Macbeth, though, seems to be shying away from the act, right? Because in that scene, we can see this interaction between them, where Macbeth says on line 30, "We will proceed no further in this business. He hath honored me of late, and I have bought golden opinions of all sorts of people, which would be worn now in their newest gloss, not cast aside so soon." And his wife says, "Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? Hath it slept since, and wakes it now to look so green and pale on what it did so freely? From this time on I shall account thy love. Art thou afeard to be in thine own act and valor, as thou art in desire?" She accuses him of letting I dare not wait upon I would, like the poor cat in the adage. In other words, she begins to mock him, mock his courage, mock his manhood, and doubt his ability to be a man and do what needs to be done and kill the king. Macbeth says, "I dare do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is none." But she won't let up on him, right? So she says, "Nor time nor place did then adhere, and yet you would make both. They have made themselves, and that their fitness now does unmake you." She says, "I have given suck. I know how tender it is to love the babe that milks me." So she's talking about having had children and, and lactating, right? And she says, "I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from its boneless gums and dashed its brains out, had I sworn to do what you have done." So this tells us a little something, right, about Lady Macbeth. And that spell that she cast to try to turn her into an instrument of cruelty. Macbeth here is the question that he has to deal with is, how badly does he really want to be on that throne, right? So he hesitates for a while she pushes him. She takes on the role of trying to push him through a variety of means, doubting his manhood, mocking him, accusing him of being weak. By the time we get to Act 2, Scene 1, he is he is at the point where he's got to make a decision. He doesn't have any more time. The king is only going to be under his roof for a few more hours. And he sees something, an apparition perhaps. So he says, "Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle towards my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, yet I see thee still. Art thou not fatal vision sensible to feeling as to sight, or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? I see thee yet, in form as palpable as that which I now draw." The dagger, now, is it really there? This is a perplexing thing. And it's a confusing thing for play directors as well, because Shakespeare doesn't give too many stage directions in his plays. We don't really know what it is that the audience is supposed to be seeing when Macbeth says this. Is there really a dagger floating in the air? If you were to try to create that on the stage, it would probably look pretty silly. You'd have to, drop it down on a string or something. So you can only think that this has got to be, as Macbeth says, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain, an apparition, an hallucination, a vision inside of his mind, a dagger, come let me clutch thee. Whether it's really there, in other words, something that the witches sent to him, a vision sent from evil, or whether it's a hallucination from his own mind, is left for the audience to determine. And this is something that we see throughout the play. Throughout the play, we get these questions about whether the supernatural events, visions, happenings, apparitions are what they seem to be, or whether they have a rational explanation. So when we're talking about the heat-oppressed brain, oh, maybe I just got overheated and now I'm having hallucinations. The same as Banquo saying, have we eaten on the insane route that takes the reason prisoner? Is this something we ate? Right? So this really is an indication of society having gotten to a certain point by the Renaissance period where supernatural beliefs that were completely accepted in medieval times, the idea that witches cast spells, the idea that spirits walk among us, angels and demons are 100% real, these beliefs of the medieval times are now giving way to scientific breakthroughs. You actually had astronomers, being able to, we're no longer in a time where astronomers believe that that all the planets revolve around the Earth. They have since realized the truth that all the planets are revolving around the sun. There have been other breakthroughs in medical science, breakthroughs in the physical sciences. So now the debate among intellectuals is, to what extent are all of these visions that we had of angels, demons, spirits, maybe there's a rational explanation for some of this, right? So we see this in Macbeth. We see the debate happening between the characters on the stage and inside the minds of the characters as they're grappling with what's really happening here. What's the source of this evil that seems to be afoot in this play? So that pretty much brings us to the end of the first period of study questions. So what we want to do in reading the rest of Act 2 and Act 3. Act 3 is the longest act of the play, and in that is where most of the conflict happens. So we're going to have one whole lecture just on Act 3, and what we want to look at is again this question of what is the source of the evil in this play. To what extent is it from supernatural sources, and to what extent is it from more familiar sources, like the kind of greed and avarice that might cause somebody to kill for power. So that's where we're going to leave it. And everybody take care, stay indoors, do what you can to help each other, and we will see you all next time.